Welcome, faraway friends, connoisseurs of fantasy, and curiosity seeker the realms over. You have arrived once more at the Port of Dark. Today, I have the inestimable pleasure of DM of the Mists joining us. Yay! A,
Hello.
a certain Steve Morgan. See? They're your bona
Hi.
fides. And I'm delighted to spend some time with you. I
Like,
knew Thank you. I knew as soon as I started my own Curse of Strahd journey that I was going to want to speak with you. Um, I found your channel a while ago, and I knew that you were right up there for me with like Dragna and Mandy Mod. So friends, if you have not seen the Dragna interview, go check that out. It was a thing. No, it was really good. He's brilliant. I got a little carried away, but I'll try to be a little more on task in this one. um, but I guess I wanted to start off, Steve, with just essentially um, where you're coming from and kind of what your journey was to in gaming to encounter Curse of Strahd, and
mm,
specifically, and I always like to ask this: what space does gaming occupy in your life? How do you? I have a very specific answer to that has changed over my various decades of GM.
okay, so I've always been into video games and board games growing up. Um, it's funny, it was only recently I landed on this. So the two types of video games I liked the most were RPGs, things like the Final Fantasy series, and and I always just thought, oh, I love RPGs. I just play RPGs. But I
Mm.
also like a lot of choose your own adventure type games, like Heavy Rain, if you're familiar with that.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah, Heavy Rain, Detroit Become Human, those, which I think was the same studio, those kinds of games where your decisions matter. And I always had an interest in D&D. I actually played, I was invited back when I was a teenager, so about 20 years ago now. Group of friends invited me to play a game, but it didn't take off. But I enjoyed it. And then I always thought, oh, it'd be nice to do that one day. And then in my day job, I'm self-employed, and I was a member of a co-working space at the time. And a
Mm.
guy joined there who ran D&D games, and he kind of gave a few sort of demo games, and it kind of created some splinter groups where the people he DM'd for then created their own groups, and they were DMing for other people. And one of the people there DM'd Curse of Strahd, and he asked me if I wanted to join his game, and I said yes. And it all fell into place from there. It was that's kind of pretty much how I got into D&D and how I got into Curse of Strahd and DMing. And yeah, and then I mean that was only like 6 years ago,
I was going to
2018.
ask. Yeah, that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started playing D&D, as in not counting that time when I was a teenager, but starting properly in 2018 with Curse of Strahd, and then started DMing in 2020. And to answer your question about how gaming fits into my life, I don't have much chance to play video games anymore. But I do obviously play D&D and DM D&D, and I just find this might be something we talk more about later. But DMing, I don't just enjoy running, the actual session, playing it on the night. I enjoy all the prep, I enjoy all the research, all of that as well, which is something we'll probably talk more about later. Was a surprise because I hated the idea of DMing at first, and then I was like, "Oh, fine, then I'll give it a go," and then ended up falling in love with it.
Really? Okay, I
Yeah,
did not know that. I've watched a
no,
few of your videos, but I did not know that about you.
yeah, I don't think it's anything I've really made that public or said in any of the videos. But honestly, um, when I saw how much effort and work my DM put into
It's
when
huge.
he ran Curse of Strahd, I was like, "Oh, that's not for me. I don't think I can manage all that." And then when I did decide to give it a try, yes, it does take a lot of work, but very rewarding.
And yet here you are making videos about it and running a thriving YouTube channel on it, So what happened?
So I wanted to start the YouTube channel. It was just an idea I had. I was like, I was writing, I was contributing a lot on Reddit, and there's a
Mm.
Facebook group as well for Curse of Strahd. I was contributing to both of those a lot, and what I was saying seemed to go down well. And I thought to myself, well, it'd be good to start a YouTube channel, but I wanted to start it over a year earlier. So it was early 2023, beginning of last year, and I just thought to myself, oh, yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, it'd be nice to do this, and then never had the time. And I'll start it next month, and then next month comes along, I'll start it next month, and so on.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And then in the end of last year, I had the idea for a DM's Guild resource, and I created that, and I put it out in late January. And when I was creating the page for it and signing up to DM's Guild for the first time, there was a little note they said where it was like, link to YouTube video, and they put something in brackets saying, oh, if you make a YouTube video all about your product, you're likely to get more sales. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, well, I'll start a channel and at least just do a demo video for the first DM's Guild product. And that was kind of the kick I needed. And then once I did that, I was like, oh, well, I might as well do more videos now. So it all came about because of that DM's Guild resource and doing the demo video. And if I hadn't created the DM's Guild resource, I probably wouldn't have created any other videos. So it's all off the back of that.
That was the creator bug biting you, by the way, right there.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, no, that's some really good context. I kind of want to dive into some of the yummy stuff that we were talking about just before we started recording, but I guess there are kind of some foundational things that I wanted to get your take on.
Sure.
And I'm coming at this from a space that I'm realizing is a little different and maybe increasingly rare. So like I first encountered Admission, which is funny because I'm a streaming GM for a 5th edition game. D&D was not my gateway drug. And I actually did not play D&D until pretty far into my gaming career, So this will be this is now year 40 that I've been GMing. And there were many other games, and that's a topic of different conversation there. But D&D was always kind of like, this is funny, right? Because it's like, it was like, that's too mainstream, and we're talking back in the days of like satanic panic, and you're gonna commit cannibalism if you play it, and just all of that. But that was too mainstream for my obnoxiously pretentious elementary self. And at any rate, I first encountered Ravenloft back in the day when it was Ravenloft, and it was 83, when that came out. And I always thought, like, wow, this is a really cool, different, interesting take. But because D&D wasn't really my bag, I didn't. I remember grabbing some ideas as a kid from it, and then kind of moving on with my life. And I just didn't even think about it for many years later. Skip a whole bunch of time. And here we are with this channel where the algorithm is relentless, and you always have to be churning out more material. And you might know a little something about that. And of course, we're a table, but like everybody has lives, everybody has children, everybody has full-time jobs, everybody. So it's like we can't just play all year long. Like that's not a thing with all the attendant steps that go into an actual play in-person situation. So we settled on I settled on Curse of Strahd as being the thing that we use, that we pre-record, and then that we use because it had so much more support than like we had to go at Daggerheart. But even with Daggerheart, I was still having to world build because they were in beta, at the time. And I'm like, it was a lot. It was a lot. I was like, y'all, I love this world, and I'm eagerly looking forward to a more developed version of it. But like in this moment, I'm like, I'm kind of at capacity here. So I grabbed something that was pre-published, and lo and behold, Curse of Strahd had resurrected itself, appropriately enough. From in my view in 1983. I know that there were other, now that I've done my research, I know that there were some other steps in there, and the evolution, like the caveman to modern man evolutionary thing, so we get to Curse of Strahd, and what do I find, Steve? I find this just jaw-dropping amount of love and creativity and perspicacity put into making making it even better than it was written, and really just incredible expansions to it. And like I said, I think this was we weren't recording it, but like in Mandy Mod's case, as I'm getting more into her stuff, it's like re-envisioned, so it's like people haven't just kind of nibbled around the edges. I was used to that. I grew up in a gaming household. I was used to kind of like, okay, if something doesn't work, you retweak it. Like some of these people have just gone, and then some of the stuff I want to talk with you, where you've got like, your 3 hot takes or whatever, and I mean, you've clearly put just a great deal of thought into this, and I never really am sure what to call it. I think Dragna called it a campaign masquerading as a module. I may be butchering.
Yeah.
I may be getting that vice versa, but yeah.
It was something like that. I didn't watch the interview before today, so I remember him saying that.
Yeah, no, it's God, God's bless you then that you made it all the way through that behemoth. So I think I know that's a long way to say, I want to see what your take is. Why do you think that Curse of Strahd has in various iterations endured since 1983? That's a long time to have a thread running, like a continuous thread. And I believe at this point it's appeared in one shape, form, or fashion in every single version of D&D since then.
I think, pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure. I might have missed 3.0, but I think it's still there. I know the rest of them, it's been there. What do you think? Why is it special? What? I mean, I have my own thoughts, but this is like, this is you're making your bones on this thing. So I really want to get your take. And one other thing I just want to say on camera, you stood out to me because you're at this beautiful intersection of insightful, charming, and self-deprecating, and that's and like I was like, I have to talk to this man. This is my vibe. I have to see. He's like he's like full of joy when it's like right now it's kind of, for a lot of people it's a rough time, and I just really appreciate that you're kind of keeping that vibe. So what do you think makes it special? What do you think has ignited the imaginations of so many people?
Gosh, I don't know. That's a really hard question to answer, actually. I guess it's kind of, that sounding corny, it means obviously different things to different people.
For sure.
But the funny thing for me was, so I'm not the biggest fan of horror when it comes to...
Really?
Yeah. So I like some horror stuff.
You are.
Huge horror fan. Definitely dark fantasy. So, grew up, but like later on, discovered things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, so like shows like that, Castlevania on Netflix. So definitely like sort of dark fantasy that leans towards horror, but I don't watch many like horror movies, for example. But so yeah, and I talk about this in one of my recent videos. The DM who ran Curse of Strahd for me didn't tell me what campaign he was doing, and he was just, "Want to play D&D?" Oh yeah, do you want to play D&D? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I had this expectation it'd be like Lord of the Rings, orcs, goblins, elves, dragons, and which it is, obviously. But then we ended up fighting vampires and werewolves, which was weird. But I was still like, hey, this is still really cool. I looked at like vampires, like the Vampire Slayer, and stuff like that. So yeah, so I kind of come from this. The question, I kind of come from the perspective of, I'm not even the biggest fan of the genre, and it's still gripped and grabbed me, which is really, when you think of it that way, it's quite bizarre, really.
It's extraordinary. No, I mean it's extraordinary. I think it stands. It's clearly, in my view, it's clearly the best written of all the 5th edition published scenarios that I've read.
Yeah, that's another good point as well. I've only ever run Lost, from a D&D point of view, I've only run Lost Mine of Phandelver, which is one of the old intro adventure, Curse of Strahd, and now running sort of more of a sort of semi-home brewed Ravenloft campaign.
Right, where you've expanded.
In terms of the published modules, it's only been Lost Mine of Phandelver, Curse of Strahd, and I enjoyed Lost Mine of Phandelver. I thought it was good, maybe great, but not amazing. And then I've read a bunch of the others. Oh, I was a player in Waterdeep Dragon Heist once as well, which I really enjoyed. Made completely the wrong character for it. Again, didn't know what I was playing. And yeah, but and then of course I bought a bunch of the books for the monsters and for the maps and for the ideas. Tomb of Annihilation, for example, is really handy for running the domain of dread called Valachan, because it's a deadly jungle. And so I've read a bunch of the others, but only run like one or two. But yeah, it's Curse of Strahd. I think it's one of those where you can run it straight out of the book and it'll work well. I know there's some hot takes people have where they say, oh, if you run it straight out of the book, you can't run it straight out of the book. You shouldn't run it straight out of the book. You need to tweak it. But I do know where the DM I had, he mostly ran it straight out of the book. And I think he did very few tweaks. And it was really good and enjoyable. And then when I ran it, I just added a few things piecemeal, things that kind of grabbed me, things I thought, well, this would be cool, or I think my players will like this. And I think it's just one of those things where you can kind of adapt it to wherever you want, or if the players sort of cling onto one location or one certain NPC, you can add more to it. A good example, talking about Mandy mod earlier, is when I discovered this stuff really early on, and was like, oh, I'll add this and I'll add this. And I only ended up adding a few things because I didn't want to overwhelm myself. But I really liked her additions for Vallaki. Now, for people watching this who don't know, Valaki's like it's the biggest town, basically. There's 3 settlements, and Valaki's the biggest, and there's a lot going on. And it's quite overwhelming as a DM when your players arrive in Vallaki being like, oh my god, they're going to meet all these people, they're going to get these quests, they can go to this place and this place. And Mandy Mod suggests adding an orphanage, and I think it's called like a reformation center. It's sort of like a prison kind of place.
Wow.
And I really like the idea of adding them, but didn't in the end, because I thought, oh, it's just too much going on already. But if I were to run Curse of Strahd again, I'm a lot more confident with it now that I know it a lot better, that I would add those. And it's quite cool thinking, gosh, if I run through it a second time, it's obviously going to be a different experience because you've got different players, and it might be a different experience because with the card reading, the talk reading, elite different people. Say my second group of players I encounter have different cards, different locations and stuff. But then also I was just thinking, gosh, and then I can add the Mandy Mod stuff, and I can dip into Drag MacArthur's stuff, and there's lunch break heroes as well, and there's somebody called Pyram King, and there's all these great guides. And it's kind of, I know there's some people who will grab one of them and run it exactly how they say. For instance, I think that's what's recommended with Drag MacArthur, is that you use that guide and you kind of run it as is. What I like doing is kind of using things, just using, like treating it like a buffet, like a menu, and going through and being like, well, I like these Mandy Mod things, I like these Drag MacArthur things, and just adding where it kind of fits. And I think Curse of Strahd lends itself well to that, where maybe other campaigns, other adventures don't. But I say this, and I'll happily say this as someone who's not had much experience running other campaigns or even reading that many other campaigns. But for me, I don't know, just Curse of Strahd grabbed me, and I'm kind of still, even though my Curse of Strahd campaign finished years ago, I still go on like the Curse of Strahd groups and help people. Just love sort of talking about it and helping people.
And that's beautiful. I mean, like that's what I'm talking about, Steve. Is there's a dedication, a love for it.
Yeah.
I don't want to overstate it, but I don't know, maybe even a kind of incipient reverence that I see about it, that I haven't seen. I don't see with any other. I've been at this a hot minute, and modules do not. The only thing that I've ever seen even come close to this, honestly, and this is one of the reasons why I'm like doing multiple interviews around it, because I'm just fascinated by this sort of thing, is in Call of Cthulhu, which I've run extensive Call of Cthulhu campaigns, is Masks of Nyarlathotep, which is generally considered like the magnum opus of that universe. It's a fantastic adventure. It's a sprawling, epic, thing that you don't normally get to do in Cthulhu, because you normally just are busy going insane or getting eaten. And it provides for that. But like even that, I don't think I have my own theories, but I wanted to ask. Okay, so anyway, what I'm hearing is that it strikes you as pretty remarkable too. Then, like as a real standout. Okay. We don't have to go down these rabbit holes necessarily, but the two things that I'm, or we can, down
I'm good.
but yeah, one of the things that that Dragnet Carta and I talked about is he looks at Curse of Strahd as having a gothic horror aesthetic, but he doesn't necessarily run it as a gothic horror substantively, you know. And whereas I'm running it, I would say I'm doing largely rules as written, not not for any philosophical reason, but just because since this is the campaign that I want people who have ever played 5th Ed to just be able to jump into.
Yeah.
Because our Darkport's main campaign is like heavily homebrewed. And that's been like a critique that I've gotten from a lot of people. It's like, what the heck is going on? It takes me, a dozen episodes to understand your world. Yeah, but as written, it's gothic horror. Like as written, I would argue that it's not just an aesthetic. Of course, he also maintains that Curse of Strahd as written is a horribly flawed module. I reserve the right to be wrong, but like for me, like we'll see, because we're just kind of getting through there. And then the other thing that occurs to me is that because I'm all into themes, I'm really into themes. I'm also an author, and I think that way all the time. Curse of Strahd gets into some themes that I don't see, or at least heavily implies them, that I haven't seen anywhere else in D&D. So, like for me, and this is part of my background coming out of Vampire the Masquerade, and ran that for years, ran a decade-long chronicle there. And like vampires are super symbolic for me. Like they have, and a lot of people, like they have all kinds of implications, and so there's like questions about autonomy, questions about frankly sadism, questions about like how we deal with the vulnerable, how we about resilience in the face of tyranny, how you maintain hope, the dangers of hope, the values of hope. Like these are all kinds of things that we're exploring as my group is running through it. I don't know, does any of that resonate with you, or in terms of why it's special?
Yeah, I remember Dragon Carter's criticism about the sort of vanilla module is flawed. I probably wouldn't. I mean, nothing's perfect, and I wouldn't say it's perfect either. And I can just think of a few examples where I think, I'm not sure about this bit, not sure about that bit. But I wouldn't say it was heavily flawed. I mean, it's got a reputation as being one of the best adventures for 5th edition for a reason. If it was heavily flawed, it wouldn't. And I've heard, I can't remember the name of it, but it was one of the first ones Wizards put out for 5th edition, where a lot of people, I remember seeing loads of people saying, "Oh, this is you can't run it. It's different. That is a heavily flawed adventure." So, but we were talking about the themes, weren't we, as well? Sorry, I kind of come back to the first part of what you were saying.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean it's all. It's. I probably should have broken it down a little bit more than that.
It's okay.
But no, I mean really just like kind of exploring what has captivated people. One thing I'll say in Dragna's, I don't necessarily defense, but I feel like he would, like he's leaned so heavily into correcting the challenge rating situation.
Yeah, that's
challenge
fair.
ratings. And so he might have been speaking, I don't want to put words in his snout, but he might have been more speaking about like the mechanical part, because I mean, let's face it, some of those fights as written are wild.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I know. Some of those good old bone grinder, like, I mean, it's going to be an interest when because I'm running a home game, Curse of Strahd, kind of parallel, and I'm running the streaming one. I'm really looking forward to how the various groups deal with these. But no, I take your point though. I take your point. It does have a reputation. I mean, it has a reputation of excellence. I wonder, and I'm still, I won't spill too much more ink over this, so to speak, but I'm just still kind of trying to wonder what is going on. Do you like the themes, or were you aware of the themes? Were they relevant for you as you were kind of going through, or?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I get what you mean, talking about the mechanics and stuff. And there was one thing I don't want to just piggyback on Tragner's interview because it'll just basically be like the echo of it. But one thing I liked was what he talked about, and one thing I think resonates with me is just the idea of like hope and the idea of the heroes come to this miserable place, and it doesn't happen straight away, but they ever so slowly make it better. I hate saying, I've seen DMs say this because it sounds anecdotal, but I've seen some Ravenloft and some Curse of Strahd DMs say it's a horror game, it's got to be horrible. Horrible in the sense of full of horror, not horrible in the sense of terrible.
Right.
It's got to be
Right.
horrible for players. That's what it's supposed to be. And you hear of some campaigns where they get TPK'd or KO'd, or have a difficult time with the hags at the windmill, or they have a difficult time with the vampire spawn at the coffin shop, they have a difficult time with the revenants at Argynvost Hall. And then you hear from often the same games the stories of, my group is imploded, they don't want to play it anymore. And I think, yes, it needs to be difficult, but there still needs to be, it can't be you don't say it can't be too difficult. But I think some people get so carried away with the whole, it's got to be a horror campaign, it's got to be hard. They forget that it's also got to be, achievable and doable for players and things like that. So, yeah, there were times I was reading through it and just being like, blindly, okay. And I wouldn't say I toned stuff down for my players, but you kind of, as a DM, you kind of adapt on the fly. And it's not just me saying this, I've seen like people give the advice where there's, I don't want to say too much because of spoilers, and I think I've already mentioned it, but there's like a really tough encounter, and people are like, there's no way players can survive this. And it's like, well, the monster's goal isn't to kill the players, it's to do these other things.
Right.
And once you start thinking of it in that terms, it's like, okay, so it is, you can kind of adapt it and make it so that it's not impossible for players. Because, if it's impossible for the players, what's the point? It's not going to be fun. So I think that's one thing I'm conscious of. It is difficult, I think, and this could be a whole other discussion of, 5th edition rules and rule set and things like that. But when I get a higher level as well, like I struggle with balance now that my players are like level 14, I think they are.
They're superheroes at that level.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. And there's only 3 of them with a couple of like NPC allies. And, I go for, sometimes you put in like really tough enemies and players no problem with them, and there's times I put in some really weak enemies and they need to get killed, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's so difficult. But it's trying to get that sort of horror vibe throughout is can be a challenge.
I think there's a reason why Curse of Strahd cuts off at 10th level. I think that's a good,
yes. Yeah, I agree with that. Whenever I hear somebody say that, my players are going to the castle at level 12 or so, level 10 or higher, basically. But if they say something like, level 12, level 13, I'm like, because that's when it's, no higher than level 9, in my opinion, which I think is supposed to be the highest they get to anyway, and then they complete, like they turn level 10 as the, during the epilogue as it finishes kind of thing, as opposed to like turning level 10 and then finishing it.
And then fighting. One thing that occurs to me that when you were talking about hope, Steve, maybe I'm a little embarrassed I haven't thought of this because this is like so obvious. Maybe part of the appeal of Curse of Strahd is that it does fulfill a basic promise of heroic fiction, which is that you can clearly see from the time you arrive to the time you leave that you have greatly and materially improved that environment. Where it's not always like like literally the skies part, where that's not always necessarily true in other, like I don't know, what is it, Dungeon of the Mad Mage or whatever, where it's like you can run through the whole thing, you can go from level 1 to level 20 and just be in this dungeon, and then at the end, depending on what the GM does with it, it's like, well, really nothing happened. You just kind of went through the dungeon and you come back out and the rest of the world's like, great, yay, you went through the dungeon, and that's kind of that. So I don't know.
I've that's one of the books I own, and I have read that and I remember reading the end of that and being like, oh really?
It's a bit underwhelming. To me, it's a bit underwhelming.
Go ahead. Oh, so I was just going to say, on that note, actually, I'm seeing that even more in the Ravenloft sequel campaign I'm doing now.
Mm.
So, in my game, Lost Mine of Thranduil, then Curse of Strahd, and then so they've defeated Strahd, they've left Barovia. Barovia's free now; people can leave. There's sunlight, and
Wow.
they've now gone to other domains of dread, such as Volkovnia, that had monthly zombie sieges, and Valachan, which is a deadly jungle, which has like Hunger Games style tournaments.
Interesting.
And each time they go to a place, they meet more people, they help more people, they defeat the enemy, the Dark Lord, and free another place. And then what they've also been doing is they've been going back to places. They've been back to Barovia a few times. This might be different to how some DMs envisage the domains of dread. There's some who say that once you leave a domain, you can never return.
Right.
Fair enough. I play it in a way that they can, they can leave, go to another domain, then they can go back to Barovia. They've been back to Barovia a few times. They've been back to Volkovnia a few times, which is one of the PCs is from. And it's great because they go back and they see their friends and things like that.
Yeah.
And I hope my players don't watch this because I've got this big plan where, and I stole this from a video game. My favorite, I talked about the Final Fantasy games earlier, but my favorite ever RPG was for the Sega Dreamcast, and it's called Skies of Arcadia, where it's basically air pirates and they have an amazing story. And there's a bit where they go around the world and they're helping all these different people in these different communities and countries and stuff like that. And then there's a bit where they, need to tackle the big bad, and they don't think they can do it. They're too small as the group versus the main villain. And then there's a really moving bit near the end of the video game where all the people they helped, going all throughout the lands, come and help them in their time of need. And then there's like a small armada of ships that do something bad. And I've got a plan in my game where the end game is going to be in a thing called Darkeport, and the BDEG of this sort of arc, if you will, is Azalin Rex.
That's Azalin. Yeah.
A famous Ravenloft villain alongside Strahd. He's a lich, and he's going to make it out as if to say, "You're all doomed. You're not going to defeat me." And then all of the people from the soldiers from Volkovnia will turn up, and the people they saved from Valachan will turn up, and they'll all kind of help and fight. Because Azalin being a lich and a necromancer have armies of zombies and other undead, and then all these people will help them out. It's like it's our time to help you kind of thing. So I'm really excited to be running that in the future. I've had the idea years ago, and the way our campaign's going, it'll probably be like another year or two away. But when we get to that moment, I'll be like, it's finally time. But and I think that's a big thing that they kind of they see, like with Barovia, they helped all these people and they return to Barovia and see how everyone's doing. They have a base there now, and they go back to Volkovnia and see familiar faces and things like that. And I think that's kind of worked really well, I think. That kind of ongoing theme of hoping. And that's the thing as well, is it doesn't feel like it's gotten old, even though you think, it's going to feel repetitive if they keep going to a different domain of dread. It's repeat thing. They go to a domain of dread, they defeat the villain, they free the place, they go somewhere else. We've not had that at all. Probably because every single domain and every single Dark Lord is different.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's at the moment the way it's going, I think there'll be 2 more domains they visit, and then possibly do the end game. But we could easily do another dozen, and I don't think that we get old and tired.
Well, you could run through those from level 1 to level 20, and just have this vast, epic sweep that I think is not to beat up on the Mad Mage, but is just so much more. The breadth of that experience as a player and also as a game master and a creator would be orders of magnitude more involved, nuanced, varied than if you're just going down a singular dungeon or something. It's really quite different. I wanted to shift gears a bit and ask you some about the running of Curse of Strahd, and then I do specifically in your case, Steve, I do want to go on to kind of some of your take and insights into running a broader campaign, in case some of our viewers are interested in doing that. At the end of their run. Part of the promise of the Darkeport channel, aside from the actual play, is that I always try to make the gift of time that people give me and spend with us. I always try to make sure that there's value back for them.
Mm.
Like it's important. It's important because time is the one thing you never get back.
Absolutely.
It's true. And you never know how much or how little it is, no matter what, no matter what happens. So what were either what were some of the areas, or if you want to talk about, if you want to approach it from a character driven perspective, you can too,
Mhm.
that you found particularly difficult to run in Curse of Strahd, and what are your thoughts on that, advice on that, maybe for like GMs who are wanting to just run the best game they possibly can.
Hmm. I don't know. Characters specifically, did you say, or just kind of any parts of Curse of Strahd?
Either way you want to tackle it, yeah. If there's a particular, like for example, there's this whole discussion that in this endless discussion that goes on about when Strahd should appear and
Oh gosh,
how
yeah.
Strahd should appear, and there's not really a definitive, at least as I read the adventure, there isn't a definitive rules as written answer to there. It'll mention Strahd and it'll talk about if this happens, he'll do this, but like, some people have him appearing right after Death House, and then
Yeah.
you know, and then some people don't have him appearing until much later. I mean,
Mm.
that's one thing we could. So that's one thing we could talk about. Like, how did you determine that kind of
Yeah.
thing because I think that's part of the difficulty of running such an open-ended adventure, that you're kind of having to like pin these things down. Or if there was
So
an area that was hard for you, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, we'll get to the when is it intro Strahd. I kind of like as you were saying that, I thought of an answer to the first part you were
The first
saying.
part, sure.
Remind me if I get carried away that going back to the intro, when to intro Strahd things. That's one of my what I call my controversial three opinions.
Right. No, I figured that was a good good segue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think for me, this might be a bad question to ask me because even though I like to think I'm time poor with my busy day job and family and various side projects, I do have a bit of an obsession with when it comes to DMing. I'm like always researching and always thinking, right, how can I, what can I do? How can I do this? And I suppose I'll always start with the base module and the book and read it, and I think, oh, okay, see what else, or if I have any questions, I'll hit Google or Reddit, see what people have said. If nobody's asked the question, I'll be the one to ask it. And so for me, I think it was a case of if I was happy with how it was, I would just do it. But then if I was unsure, I'd see what else was out there. A good example of this actually is the werewolf den, which I think that's where I kind of agree with Drag McCarter when he was saying about flawed parts of the campaign. I feel harsh saying this. I hate hating on people and saying, this isn't very good or whatever. But I think it's kind of regarded as one of the weaker areas of campaign. And then so I didn't want to run it as is, and then I ended up using for that one. I think I used the lunch break heroes. That's another mod similar to Drag McCarter and
I think I read some of
yeah.
that for the werewolves actually.
And I could take or leave some of their stuff, and that's not. I don't mean that as a slant towards them, but there'll be sometimes where they'll say, and this is the same with Drag McCarter and Mandy mod, where they would say, "Oh, why don't you consider this for this location?" I'd read it and be like, "No, it's okay. I'll just do what's in the book." But then for Lunch Break Heroes, they had a great suggestion on how to sort of change the changes they made for the werewolf. Then I kind of went for their version. So I think I'm just one of those people who likes to really get deep into researching. If I know my players are going to approach this area, what does the base information say? What can I change? What can I add? Stuff like that. And I do that with my I don't want to bounce ahead to the non-Curse of Strahd stuff, but that kind of echoes with the Ravenloft stuff as well. The current, they're about to finish a domain and then researching another domain soon, and it's just a case of having fun, like doing tons of research for that, whether it's looking at old lore, looking at Reddit, reading novels, the old Ravenloft novels and things like that. But going then back to the when to intro Strahd. So yeah, that was part of my controversial three, because I remember seeing a thread on Reddit a long time ago well, not a long time ago, it was probably a few months ago, where someone said, when is the best place to introduce Strahd? And the most highly upvoted answer was Collion's funeral in the village of Rovia. So that's Irina and Ismark's father. And this, for those of you who don't know Curse of Strahd, and I don't think this is spoilers, because if you were a player, you'd find this out pretty much straight away. Their father, or in Irina's case, adopted father, dies. I think it's like a couple of days before the players arrive in Barovia. So then they've got to help out with the funeral if they want to help out. And a lot of people introduce him then. They say it makes sense because he's a nobleman. You'd want to pay and honor his respects. It gives an opportunity to see Irina as well. And I do say in like that video that it is a good place to introduce him. But I think the biggest downside to it is it's too early in the campaign, and that what makes Strahd a really good villain is there's a lot of build-up in the lore of this guy is serious business. He's, there's all these ghosts of dead adventurers who every single night here. And the hundreds, maybe thousands of people he's killed over the centuries. You hear a story of a powerful wizard who tried to take out Strahd and was defeated, and the wizard tried to get the village to do an uprising, and they were, spotted like flies. And, the town of Blackpool were terrified that he might come one day because he's not been seen there for centuries. All this kind of stuff. And I had two players who were kind of jokey and not very serious, and they kind of took the mick out of do you guys have that expression over there in America, take the mick? I don't want to say, make fun of.
We don't have that expression, but I got the feel of it.
The take the P word is, I think it's all right for you guys in America, but in the UK it's like a swear word. But anyway, they used to make fun and mock the. That's what mock. They were mocking the villain basically, and thought he was silly and stuff. So I was like, oh god, I hope they don't do that with Strahd. Think Strahd is silly or don't take Strahd serious. But I felt that because I introduced him later on, and I introduced him after their first visit to Blackie, after they first left Blackie for the first time, they went to the winery, they did a quest there, which is kind of where I think most groups would go, and levels-wise is appropriate. And then they went to somewhere straight after that. There was a little bit probably over their level, and it was one of those battles where they made a few tactical errors, the dice worked against them, and it was very close to being a TPK. I was proud of them in the end that they didn't. And that's when I introduced Strahd for the first time. And they were terrified, not because of all the lore drops as well, but they were in a very weak position at that point, where they were like, this guy could probably really easily defeat us all right now. You've got to be careful what we say. And I just think that makes a difference. All of that said, though, I think, and I make this point in the video, I think everyone kind of has a different idea of Strahd. And again, going back to the sort of malleable discussion we had earlier, I think that's the great thing. Everyone's version of Strahd is different, and everyone can meld Strahd to be different. And some people do like the idea that he's there straight out of Death House applauding. Some people like the idea that he's there at Collier's funeral. But for me personally, I like the idea of him being, not too far into the campaign, but not too early either. And then even though I introduced him a little bit later, I still introduced him maybe like half a dozen other times throughout. And every single time my players were like, oh no, it's him again. We've got to be on our best behavior. Which is great. And it's, it went from me being terrified of role-playing him because I was worried I'd do it wrong. I was worried they wouldn't take it seriously. They just think it's a joke. To, it almost came across as quite effortless and quite almost like, this is fun. I'm tormenting. It's great. So yeah, it's
And this was your first outing as a GM, yes?
Second, if you count Lost Mine of Fandalva.
Oh, you ran that first. Okay.
All the same group and the same players with the same characters. That's that whole other thing as well, as we started Curse of Strahd at level 5 instead of the recommended level 3 or level 1 if you Death House, the intro style for adventure. But yeah, so if you do count Lost Mine of Endeavor, it was my second, but if you kind of all roll it into one, it was my first.
And was first. That's right. I'm remembering that now, Steve, that you kind of had that whole run, and then there was a bit of a tonal shift and all of that, which is that's definitely its own discussion too about tone, and you had a really maybe I'll pin that one. You had a really good video on whether or not you should surprise your players with Curse of Strahd, because in universe you easily could. The mists just roll on in one night.
Well, exactly.
That's it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I guess kind of to drill down on this idea. Were there any characters that you really had difficulty in Curse of Strahd? And because it's quite a collection of different of unsavory people, you know. Were there any characters that you had difficulty connecting with as a GM and like bringing to life and portraying? And then what would your advice be? Like, how did you overcome that? Or were you pretty much like all of them made sense to you and at least on some level and you were fine?
So I think I was mostly fine, but for two reasons. One was
have to bring it here. Yeah.
This is the banner on my YouTube channel. There's Rudolf van Richten,
Yes.
vampire, famed monster hunter, vampire hunter. There's two main reasons. It helped that I was a player in Curse of Strahd, first of all, so I kind of already seen someone else role play them, and then from there I was like, okay, I might role play it like how my previous DM did it, or maybe I'll tweak it. Or what was interesting is like when I was a player, we didn't do Argynvost, and then when I was a DM, we did. So that was my first time. Like, that was brand new to me, just as it was brand new to my players. The other thing as well is I think Curse of Strahd is really good in giving enough information about the different NPCs. So going back to Lost Mine of Phandelver, my memory of it, and it might be different now that it's kind of been adapted into a bigger adventure. I think it's called Phandelver and Below Shattered Obelisk. And essentially Lost Mine of Phandelver is part 1 and part 2 is like an extension. But my memory of Lost Mine of Phandelver is the main town they get to. A lot of the NPCs are quite vanilla and are quite, this is the person who runs the shop, this is the person in the tavern. And I don't remember there being a lot of direction with what they were like. And this is a blessing and a curse, because the good thing is that means DMs can do what they want.
You just make them right.
To having to role play them this way that's been recommended. But I saw it the other way around. I was a brand new DM. I needed some sort of direction or something like that. And the problem I was like, I don't know how to DM this person or who they are or what their goals are. But with Curse of Strahd, I just felt like a lot of the characters there were a lot more fleshed out. You have
plenty of help. Speaking of Strahd, yes.
My best friend. Even like to put it in perspective, like as I said, in Lost Mine of Phandelver, some of the shopkeepers, they just gave you a name and a rough description, or they're a human of this age. And then I just didn't feel like there was much more to it. But like in Curse of Strahd, there's a toy shop, and the toy maker even tells you like how to sort of almost like suggestions of what kinds of things he would say, what his voice might sound like. And that's great. And you can do a lot with that. And I found that was the case with lots of the characters. There's a great from like, and a great example as well is, because I was still quite new and still quite nervous, especially because I had the jokey players. I guess because when I was a new DM, I struggled to run bad guys or villains or people who weren't good people. And a great example of this is the Baron in Vallaki. And I played him as very sort of grumpy and irritable, but he's like, he got introduced. The players got introduced to him through Ismark and Irina, and so he's like there almost as if like, I'm only doing this because of them. And he's talking about the festivals, and one of my players said, "These festivals don't sound like they're a good idea, and are they really going to keep Strahd away?" And I just said, the Baron bangs his fist on the table. My players are like, "Whoa, okay." It's just like, I don't know. Again, I think that was kind of. And I think that was, maybe it was me getting better and adapting as a DM and improving as a DM, but I think it's also just both the sort of Curse of Strahd, the book, and also the wider community on places like Reddit, and there's a Facebook group I go to as well. They just do a really good job of helping you sort of flesh out and understand the NPCs and stuff. And then you can kind of, and this is probably one of my videos coming up where I really want to do like an NPCs video where I kind of just show how I roleplayed them all. Probably starting with the Fated Allies or Strahd's enemy from the Troupe reading, and then maybe do everyone else, basically, like all the ones who are villains and sort of more neutral, I guess. But it's from roleplaying someone like Aragorn, the assassin Bastana, who I almost like wanted to like play as this kind of cocky sort of rock star, to playing like the abbot in Kresk, who is quite creepy. I remember artwork where he's shown as being sort of stood like this, and he's got his hands like that, and I would just, even things like posture makes a difference. So I was like having like whenever I role played him, I would be sat like stood like this, and I think I just talked in a monotone voice like this, and just things like that. I think, I don't know. I like to think it's just, I think, and this is one of the strengths of Curse of Strahd, is just it gives you enough information about the NPCs, at least as a starting point, to make you think, oh, actually, this is how I can, I can run with this, and I can adapt it from there, or maybe it's even enough to run it as it is.
To our earlier point, to kind of wrap it, to tie it back in, I think part of the excellence of the published module is that, to your point, they list motivations of these characters. They list all the major characters anyway. They give you quotes from them in their voice. I mean, it's I agree with you. I mean, I think there's a lot. I was just, okay, so that all, you may not know this about yourself, but I've been doing this long enough to say, Steve, I can with confidence, I can tell you you're a born GM. Like the way that your mind works, the way that you approach things, the way that you don't get discouraged, the way that you're like fascinated by the material. That's all like, and you can't really, like, you could teach the tools, but you can't really teach that. People are either interested in it or not.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean that.
Before we move on, I got a point on that might be helpful to people watching. I do, in addition to being a player of Curse of Strahd, which helped, I think one thing that really helped was I really wanted to run Curse of Strahd because I'd just been a player in it. But I did Lost Mine of Fandalva first because it was part of the starter set, and it was smaller, it was linear. For people who are wanting to, excuse me, sorry, got a lump in my throat. For people who want to run Curse of Strahd, but they are brand new to DMing, I would not heavily recommend, but I would suggest trying something smaller, more beginner first. Because I felt like I got all of my mistakes out of the way in Lost Mine of Fandalva, and that made Curse of Strahd a lot smoother. If I had not done Lost Mine of Fandalva first and gone straight into Curse of Strahd, I might have made mistakes, and that might have knocked my confidence, and I might have, I might not have finished running the campaign. I might not even make videos like I'm doing now, because I might have thought, oh, I'm not good at role-playing these people. So that would be my advice. I was really eager to get started with it, but I was like, no, let me try something a bit easier and smaller and more sort of beginner for DMs as well as beginner for players, a bit more traditional, and I'm glad that I did that. So that would be a bit of advice I'd give with that in mind.
I think that's sound advice. I think that's really good. I think if you've never GM'd before and you just pick up Strahd and you're like, yeah, I'm going to run this, that would be a lot. That would be a lot if you've never, because it is for a first go at it. I'd say it's a pretty sprawling, multifaceted adventure.
Yes.
So transitioning a bit, do you have some thoughts on how to plan if you know that you're going to run a wider campaign post Barovia, post Curse of Strahd? What have you done with that? What's worked? What hasn't? Give us some insight in that direction.
So I got really lucky in that a few things kind of happened organically to kind of let it happen. So I was halfway through running Curse of Strahd when Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft came out. So I ran Curse of Strahd from 2020 to 2022, and I think Van Richten's Guide came out in 2021, so smack bang in the middle. I got the book, obviously, because I was like, oh, and if something will help me with Curse of Strahd. And then I just reading about these domains, like, this is cool, this would be good to do afterwards. Even though I was kind of intimidated at the idea of thinking, well, part of it will be homebrew then. And then I haven't got like something like a written adventure to fall back on, other than digging into, say, I guess, old adventures from second edition and
can you explain
stuff like that?
Sorry, can you explain what for some viewers who may not be familiar with it, what Van Richten's Guide is?
Oh, sorry, of course. So Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft is another 5th edition book, but it's not an adventure. There is actually a one shot in there, It's not an adventure book, it is a setting book. So it's the setting of Ravenloft, which is the wider setting that Curse of Strahd and Curse of Strahd is set in Barovia. Barovia is a domain of dread. Ravenloft is the setting of all the domains of dread. So as I kind of touched upon before, you've got Barovia, where an evil vampire rules. You've got Folkovnia, where there's zombie sieges. You've got Valachan, the Deadly Jungle. You've got Amordia, which has got sort of like a Frankenstein vibe going on. And there's loads. Cool. They've got information of about a dozen different domains, whereas a few pages each, a map, adventure ideas. This is the Dark Lord, and then they've got like maybe probably like 24 minor domains which are from old lore, where it's just little bits of information and stuff. And I got really lucky in that a few things happened. So that happened, that book came out, and at the right time. And I was like, I had a year then to kind of sit on it and be like, this is cool, and get a few ideas in my head. One of my players, her partner joined the game halfway through as a character, and that character is a paladin. And for the backstory, they just said, a knight from somewhere. And I approached them. I said, do you mind? You can say they're from somewhere. I haven't got a destination in mind. Is it okay if they're from Folkovnia and they're from this world where there's another domain of dread like Barovia and there's the zombie sieges going on? And it was like, yeah, that sounds great. So that knew they learned a little bit more about the domains, and they'd already learned a little bit more from there's 2 NPCs in Curse, a little bit more about the mysteries of domains of dread, and that's Rudolph and his protege Esmeralda, because they're both from the domains of dread and domains. And I've done that thing where I've gotten so digressing on so many points. My brain's what's the point I was going to make? Your editor's gonna have to edit this out.
No, you're good. So that I do this all the time. Believe me. Sometimes on screen.
Oh yeah, just think about that player. And they learn about the domains of dread. And then I suppose if I just do it from here. Yeah, so they knew somewhere they were gonna go afterwards. They heard about other domains they got name dropped. Valachan got Markovia, there's an island called Markovia. They got name dropped at different points, just kind of naturally in the campaign, but it's a long story, how they got mentioned and stuff. But they had all these like sort of mini books and seeds dropped. And then when they defeated Strahd and finished Curse of Strahd, and were able to leave Barovia, and that's when a lot of people wrap it up and say, right, we're going to do a different campaign now, or someone else is going to DM, and I was quite happy to carry on. My group shrank a bit, so I had 6 players, but 2 moved away. One kind of left the game for personal reasons just before it ended anyway, and another one had gotten too busy, so it went down from 6 to 2.
Yeah.
There was 2. It was going to be 3, and then so I said to those 3, should we carry on? And they're like, yes. And then we made preparations to start it, and then one of those, the other ones dropped out, so there was then 2. And I, instead of thinking, 2 is too little, and I did say, should we get more players? And they were a bit like, one of my players was a bit nervous about getting people they didn't know, which is fair enough. And I was like, let's just keep it to just 2 players. And, there's benefits to that. Like, there's fewer scheduling.
Yeah, for sure.
And, it's pretty easy to do. And, so, and then one of the people who was still around, one of those 2 players was the one who had the paladin from Folkovnia. So it was a natural transition to be like, right, what do you do next? And the paladin was like, well, I want to go home to my domain and help out. We're going to go back to sorting out the zombie sieges. And so that was really handy to have, and that kind of helped it sort of flow naturally. And then I had the idea halfway through their time in Folkovnia to do what I call a second Troupe reading. So the first Troupe reading being the one in Curse of Strahd, where Madam Eva, there's this sort of, for people watching this who don't know, there's a mechanic in Curse of Strahd feature where it's like a tarot reading, they call it Troupe, in the in-universe, that lead the players to items and an ally that can help them to defeat Strahd. This was expanded to be items and a fated ally spread across all domains of dread. And I came up with it myself, a clue for each card, based on the domains where I wanted to run and the allies I knew from Van Richten's guide and some other things. And they ended up with items in the Sea of Sorrows, which is kind of like the piratey kind of seafaring domain of dread. And there's one in full Covenant, which is handy because they're already in full Covenant. I'm drawing about the Carnival. So it's like an evil carnival, Raven. Well, I say evil carnival, Ravenloft carnival. It's very evil, but it's kind of obviously the sort of gothic horror vibe carnival. And then that ally was in Mordant, which is kind of like a domain that's like got ghost stories and things like that. And so straight away from there, they knew, right, once we're doing full Covenant, we've got to find the Sea of Sorrows, we've got to find this place called Mordant, and so on and so on. And then from there, they were able to learn about more domains of dread, and sometimes they accidentally stumble into a domain of dread. Sometimes somebody was like, "Oh, this domain needs help, can you go there?" kind of thing. And at that point, I was then able to sort of easily introduce more domains. But it was really good early on to be like, right, you've got these 3 or 4 places you can go to. Where do you want to go to next, kind of thing. Had to give some like direction and purpose to the campaign.
For sure. For sure. And you're introducing these new domains and these new concepts through a medium that's already familiar to the players because they've had the Taroko reading in the original campaign.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true as well. So, and that was the thing. They felt the way that the setup was with the person who gave them this second Taroko reading. I could understand if they were a bit like, this feels a bit odd, but because they were used to having a Taroko reading before, they were like, well, we know this will help us. So when the character, the NPC said to you, that in order to pay you back for helping me come with this Taroko reading, they were like, yes, please, because we'll probably get some magic items out of it. So
this is a good thing.
Yeah.
and then just a bit, I do want to have you show one of the variations that you came up with for the Taroko reading that we had discussed. I think that's also, I mean, like on top of everything else, Curse of Strahd has, because I have a LARP background as well, live action role play. So I love like bringing in scrolls and props and physical acting and, all of that. Mm-hmm. You want to give a shout out to some of the other Ravenloft channels maybe that are out there, other sources. Yeah, just kind of so people can branch out and see what they think. Aside from your own excellent channel, Steve Morgan.
This is the thing, right? There aren't even that many. I can probably count on one hand how many there are. There are obviously people there are some bigger YouTubers who might talk a little bit.
Who dip their toes. Yeah.
Dip their toes, yeah. So they'll kind of talk, there'll be a 10-minute video that gives like an overview of what Covenant is like and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong. But in terms of dedicated channels, there's not many out there. But the ones I know of and listen to and enjoy are, there's a guy called Dr. Jason Bowers. He runs one called PhD&D, where he gives ideas of adventures for different domains and often borrows from other 5th edition source books. So, for example, there's a minor domain called Naranjan. That's one of the brand new ones for 5th edition. And his adventure is based on a Candlekeep Mysteries adventure. And with a very little tweaking, you just have to kind of tweak who the villain is a little bit and change some things around. It works perfectly. And I ran it in my game, albeit at a higher level. I got 2 players who were much higher level than, probably what was suggested. Is a sort of like, level 3 to level 5 or whatever. But I adapted it and things like that, and it worked really well. So I recommend his stuff. There is a YouTuber called, I think his name is Gabriel. It's called Hour of the Raven. And he basically just does deep dives, looking at the old lore, and basically says, this is the history of this domain. This is all the locations of this domain. This is what the people are like in this domain. This is what the Dark Lord's like. And those are really handy. So at the moment, I'm researching one called Haslam, which my players are going to go to next. And it's kind of like a domain of magical ruin, where it's almost like anytime you cast a spell, there's a risk of rolling on the Wild Magic Surge table. It's like an adaptive one, similar to like Wild Magic Sorcerers. And so there's loads of possibilities of weird and wacky monsters I can put in that. So I was watching his videos about, talking about the old lore, although he does do some where he kind of does comparisons. So like, this is the 5th edition Hazlitt versus the old edition Haslan, sorry, Haslick's the name of the Dark Lord. I get too mixed up all the time. But yeah, things like that. There's another one I've seen some videos of. I can't remember his real name, but it's called Ravenlaw. I've seen some of those. One of those was really handy because it was about a magic item that I included in my game. So that was
Raven
good.
Lore?
Ravenlaw, yeah.
Cool. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's a good name. And then there's another one which I've watched a lot of them. It's similar to Hour of the Raven. I think it's called like Ravenloft Travel Agent, and it's a similar thing. It's a great name. A similar thing where it's doing dives into the old lore and
some beachfront property and some beachfront property in Barovia. You know.
Yeah. Her videos are great. I think she'll always like do some sort of jokey thing at the end where she's like, "Be careful, you go to this domain. Make sure you check with the travel agent if it's safe to go there," kind of thing. And it's the answer. No, it's not safe. Yeah, those are the only ones that I know of and can think of. If there's a Ravenloft YouTuber watching this and shaking their fist at the screen, left them out there, sorry, and
let us know.
I'm one of these people who's like the more the merrier. When I research a domain, I'll devour every and any video, blog post.
For sure.
So if there are YouTubers, Ravenloft YouTubers out there that I don't know of, I want to get to know them and watch their stuff.
No, I think it's a good rundown. I completely agree. This is such a rich, as you can see on Reddit, if you read Reddit, with the Curse of Strahd, the Curse of Strahd folks, like it's huge and sprawling, and and it's all to the good. It's it's kind of like Jeet Kune Do, where you use what works for you. You go through it and you kind of grab. Not everything's going to be for everybody, but I no, the more the merrier is a good succinct way of putting that together. Yeah. So before the last thing I kind of wanted to touch on, and I'll be sure to give you a did we miss anything? Make sure that there's not something that's popped up, but I asked Dragna this too, and I'll come at it slightly differently. I was, as someone who's again been in this space a while, I was honestly quite surprised at how direct and like explicit the adventure that was written in 2016 was about some of the queer themes running through it. So you had like it, and believe me, kids, that was not a thing back in the day. And you had to really like occasionally, sometimes in some of the of all places, some of the Marvel adventures, you could like squint and turn your head sideways, and you'd be like, "Are they implying what I think they're implying?" But I was kind of caught off guard in a really good way by like how, for example, you have I don't want to, again, I'm trying to be a little bit careful with spoilers, but you have like several canon where you have one canon couple in Argynvostholt. You have which is like not your typical pairing, and then you have one of Strahd's consorts who is canonically male, and it's interesting, like, and even in the art, and even in the artwork, you have like the three brides, and then you have Escher, who's like portrayed right along with them. Just in case anybody's like, well, really the word consort can mean companion, and and all this. I'm like, well, okay, there it is in the art, and then I guess Esmeralda is almost always queer coded as well, for different people, I don't know. So you had like very graciously kind of laid out your perspective on that when we were corresponding. Were you surprised at all at this, or I don't know, maybe it wasn't as big of a deal to you because you were newer to the space and you're like, cool,
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe I surprised in a good way. Like, it's good to see that stuff like that is being included. I have two of my players. I'm sure they won't mind me saying this. Two of my players are LGBTQ, and I've got a great anecdote actually involving Godfrey and Vladimir, who are the couple you talked about. But then again, you said about spoilers, so
that's okay. It's okay. I think John, that even as I was dancing around that, I was like, I think we just named them, so
yeah,
it's okay.
Yeah, okay. So they are knights in a old order of knights. I won't go into too much detail about the history of the knights, but basically they're these two revenants, so they're almost like these sort of like zombie ghost type knights, who were not just comrades on the battlefield, but they were in love with each other. And I noticed my two LGBTQ players were really attached to their story. And in the epilogue, so they defeated Strahd, Sunlight returned to Barovia, and in the epilogue it says some other things that happen about, there's the Irina and Sergei thing, although I did a bit of a spin on that. And Rictavio leads and all that other stuff. And I added a thing in because what happened in my game is we started Argynvostholt, and then that's when two of my players were moving away to somewhere where they were like, we're not sure if you've even got an internet connection, we're going to be busy with new jobs. So I was like, oh gosh, got to wrap up the campaign. So they didn't fully finish Argynvostholt and light the beacon, which frees the Revenants. But if Strahd's defeated, that also frees the Revenants. And so I said, as part of the epilogue, one of the Keepers of the Feathers, who's almost like this part of this rebel spy network of good guys, there was a rumor that one of them saw two ghosts of these men smiling at each other, holding hands, and then they walk off into the sunset. And my two LGBTQ players full on ugly cried at that, like happy tears. And it made me full on ugly cry, because I was like, oh, I can't believe how much it's moved them. I think that's a really good example about how this stuff matters, because if it had just been another heterosexual couple, like in 99.9% of whatever in media and in stories, they might not anywhere near as being as attached. But because it was a gay love story, they were like, wow, that speaks to us, kind of thing.
Of these two knights,
me, and it moved them, and then it moved me. So I think that's a good example of this stuff matters. And I hope the person who wrote that part of Curse of Strahd decided that those two characters would be in a relationship and be in love with each other is kind of proud that that's kind of had an impact on at least my players, and I'm sure other players out there. What I'd like to add as well is there's some more. I don't know if you're familiar with Van Richten's guide, the Ravenloft setting book.
Not this version. Yeah, I haven't read through it yet.
You queer characters in that. So there's two other proteges of Van Richten they're very, very much like I forgot his name, Sherlock Holmes and Watson. They're basically two detectives. You got the one like genius detective and his assistant, and they're, as well as business partners, if you will, they're also life partners. And one of the Dark Lords as well is I mentioned Haslan earlier, Haslik. You read that and it says about how he had a rival, and as well as being very competitive and rival with each other, they were also passionate lovers. And it's like, wow, okay. And it's great that it's included things like that. And then I've included a few more because of my players being LGBTQ. I've included a few like NPCs. There's one tied to a backstory who I made, and it wasn't revealed straight away. Turns out she had feelings for another woman, and that kind of surprised people. It's quite funny because I had another NPC who was a male NPC trying to flirt with her, and at that point he was like, "Oh, sorry, no." And I introduced a character who was non-binary as well, and that was simply because I was in the Sea of Sorrows, and I was searching for cool artwork of NPCs to include, and I came across someone who'd made a non-binary sea elf pirate, and I was like, "That's cool, I'm using them." So just things like that as well. So awesome. It's kind of, I've tried to include a few more, but yeah, it's good that the Ravenloft setting book includes some as well. And like we were talking earlier about, I'm not too familiar with other adventures and other settings, but I was glad to see that kind of thing is included.
Well, and there's a whole conversation there about like how I feel like the Gothic horror of it all allows for dynamics and for characters quite naturally. that
Mm.
that that I don't know, it doesn't cut against the grain the way that the way that like you'd have to kind of really break the mold if you were doing this with more traditional heroic fiction, just because the groove is so deep,
Yeah.
and I don't know, I'm watching it. Have I don't want to spoil anything for the campaigns, but I'm trying my own kind of considered take on some of the identity explorations in my version of it. So because we just got to Barovia, but we just got to the village, baby. So, so it's like, I mean, there's miles and miles yet to go.
Yeah.
Well, is this a good point for you to show us your stuff with
Yeah.
the Troupe reading? Does that feel good?
Yeah. Do.
Okay. And you want to
So
explain, yeah, contextualize all that.
great. Thank
Yeah.
you. So I mentioned the second Troupe reading earlier, which is kind of I've done two. So the second Troupe reading, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of a supplement to run a Ravenloft campaign, the Domains of Dread campaign. And then about 2 months after that, I put out what I call the 3-pile Tarokka technique.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps. It's what I call a nice in-between the Tarokka reading, because the Tarokka reading Curse of Strahd, if you do it as the book says, and do it fully random, it's risky because you could end up with, as I mentioned earlier, just to recap a little bit, it guides the players to items and an ally that can help fight Strahd. And if you get a really powerful item straight away, or the item that gives information about the villain later on, it's not very satisfying if you get all three of them in one place. So if all three of them end up in Valaki, and they just go to Valaki and find all three straight away, so they're like, campaign's nearly over. We only just started. So it's risky.
There's one with Madame Ava where it's like, oh, I think I'm sitting on it. Yeah.
It's under my nose. Yeah. It is. It's just feeling like,
yeah. The person who's giving you the reading is like, oh wow, look at this. Yeah.
And so it's there is a lot of risk to it. And so when I ran it, I still did it random, but I took some bad cards out. I took the one out where it's in Madame Eva's tent. I took out the Castle Ravenloft cards because a lot of people treat that as an endgame dungeon. It can be quite hard to get there. I think I did anything that involves backtracking. And then from there, I went random. And I ended up having a pretty good spread, but there's still the risk that I could have had them in a weird order, or that I could have had 3 items in the same place. And then I saw somebody on Reddit say, oh, when I did it, I split them into 3 piles, the items. And I thought, that's a good idea. But they didn't actually expand on it any further. They just said, that's what I did. And so I didn't see anyone anywhere like sort of taking the idea further. So I decided to take it further with this DM's Guild resource, where essentially it tells you which cards to remove, like the ones I kind of said earlier. And then with the remaining cards, you split them into 3 piles. This one's for the Tome of Strahd, to give information about Strahd. That's a good one to get sort of early on. This one's for the Holy Symbol of Ravenkind. It's just like a holy symbol that there's some cool vampire fighting stuff. That's good to find in the middle of the campaign, ideally. And in the Sun Sword, which I like to call the Sunlight Lightsaber, that is good to find really late on, because you don't want to find that too early. That's kind of find that right near the end when you're just about ready to take down Strahd.
It would trivialize a lot of, yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
It would trivialize a lot of encounters if you got that at the beginning or even toward the middle, I think.
Yes, the risk of that. So it's so then I kind of came up with this system of like, I think these chapters suit these cards best. And so what happens then is, because I should have mentioned this earlier, what some DMs do is they rig it, so they'll choose, they won't make it random at all, and they will choose which items go to which place. I think I can completely understand why DMs do that. It's safer, it's more satisfying narratively. It will ultimately lead probably to a better campaign. But maybe I'm just a slight lover of chaos and randomness. I think it's exciting for me as the DM, and I know there'll be other DMs who disagree with this, but I find it exciting, and I think the players find it exciting if I'm literally shuffling the cards in front of their faces and say, this card is the thing. And then so what I like about the 3-pile Tarokka technique is it's the in between. You kind of are sort of rigging it, but it's still random. You can still shuffle cards and show to the players, this was random, and you could have had that card instead of that card. But
You found a functional middle path, Steve.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I really wanted you to be able to expound on that.
Yeah, so I've actually got the cards. I don't know if you can see in the shop, but I got some of the cards behind me split into 3 piles. So I could even give like a demo right now.
Yeah, go for it. Let's
See
see.
what the 3 cards are, assuming I did the pile right. Yeah, well, it's a way to find out. So if we get this one, this is the first pile. It ends up being about 10 cards per pile, maybe a little bit less. So this one would be for the Tome of Strahd. You want this sort of early to mid game, and if I should shuffle on the screen, and if I take a card and show it, the Traitor card.
There you go. Yep.
And the Traitor card is 9 of Glyphs. I'm not doing all the card reading, full on reading it, but just to give an idea of the clues. Or just say what they are. Where are you? 9 of Glyphs. I was looking at the wrong one. So that's in the Wachter house in Valaki. So I would say that's a good one to have fairly early. In fact, that was weirdly enough, that was what my players had when I did it semi-random. And the tome in the Wachter house.
That's nice. Yeah, no, that's good.
That's very weird. So that was the first one. Then for the symbol, again, sort of 10-ish cards there. You want this to be kind of mid-game. When you look at the table in the beginning of the Curse of Strahd, and it kind of says, these locations are level 3 for this,
right.
This level 5. So it's kind of the sort of 5, 6, 7, maybe. Well, yeah, 5, 6, 7, I think. It might not align with that perfectly, but it's that kind of idea. And then again, you can see I'm shuffling. If I take this card, this is Myrmidon. And Myrmidon is 5 of Swords. And Myrmidon is the werewolf then.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is kind of middle-ish campaign, I think.
That's maybe about right. Yep.
Middle, maybe 2/3. And then the third card, set of cards for the Sun Sword.
For the lightsaber, yeah.
The lightsaber, yeah. And I think whoever uses it has got to do, when they do their bonus action to activate, has got to do the... Yeah. Yeah. It's got to be done. So again, shuffling the third and final pack of cards. This is Enchanter.
Oh, wow.
The Enchanter card is, it's right in front of me. Berez, which is Babala Saga, which is considered...
Oh, yeah.
One of the... I think that a lot of people consider Amber Temple the hardest place, and then I think Berez is second hardest. So I think a lot of the cards are either Berez or Amber Temple for the Sun Sword, and then 1 or 2 other places that are kind of at that level. So what do we have again? Valaki, Werewolf Den, Berez.
Wachter House, Werewolf Den, and Babala Saga, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess there is the risk that they might hear about, say, the Berez from the Martyr Corps and think, oh, we can go there sooner. But, you know, if as a DM you can warn them, and I think there's an NPC written into Berez who like warns them, you know, you shouldn't be here, it's too dangerous. So you can kind of tell them, oh, maybe you should go to that place later when you're a little bit stronger and get the other ones first and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, that's just an example. And then what you do for the ally and the Strahd's location in the castle, which are the 4th and 5th card, that's like a different set of cards anyway. There's like a high deck and a low deck.
Right.
So the low deck was all the items. So then you could just do the high deck cards as normal. Should I do I've actually got them behind me. Should I do the 4th and 5th card to see how it would have ended up?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. This is the part of the, my resource only deals with the items, but to get the full flavour, I should have drawn and redo that. So again, shuffling. Mist card for the ally is for Strahd's enemy, if we want to be official about it.
In the
Esmeralda.
Esmeralda, perfect.
And then the final card for Strahd's location in the castle. I think I took a few of those out as well in some of the ally choices, but Don John. That is the Hall of Bones, which is on one of the low levels. There you go.
For our faraway friends who may not know, the fated ally is kind of the it's just that. It's the person that kind of, even if it's unlikely narratively, they're just kind of fate will conspire to make them your ally against Strahd, and then they have some mechanical effects as well that are different.
Correct.
And then for Strahd's location, it's the one spot that Strahd is guaranteed to be at. If you go to confront him there, so he doesn't necessarily stay there, but he will start there.
Correct. Yeah, so, I like to say it's where the final battle starts. It's not necessarily where the
that's a good yes.
Because he can move around, but he will be there on his own. I think it says, except for I think it's like there's 1 or 2 places where there already are monsters there, but in most of the places he's on his own, and it says he's not supposed to have any minions with him in the book. But yes, so there's about a dozen different locations he can be within his castle as well. Some easier to get to than others.
Some significantly easier to get to than others. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So we just walk around the back. There we go.
Well, Steve Morgan, what are some other? Give me some final thoughts or what we missed or
I don't know.
What you want to clean up with, or food for thought. Any of those good stuff.
No, I'm drawing a blank, honestly. If people liked this interview, then if they want to subscribe to the channel, if they want to check out the DMs Guild resources, follow me on Blue Sky or what have you, then, please do. And I love talking about this stuff. So, feel free to, if you see me on Reddit, my username on there, I think it's EVPhilCDF. You'll see the little smiling dude with the green t-shirt. I'm on there all the time. I think I got a notification the other day that I'm in the top 1% of commenters on the subs. I'm like, oh gosh, I should get out more. But if you see me on the Curse of Strahd or Ravenloft subreddits, and you want to ask me a question, go with nuts. Or on YouTube, feel free to ask questions. I have some people just ask me questions, and I answer as many as I can. I love talking about stuff. I love helping DMs. I'm just really into it and stuff. And I find it works the other way as well, because I go on to, especially the Ravenloft subreddit these days, I'm leaving posts asking questions, and then other DMs are helping me. So it's all,
there's no one of the reasons why I think you're a born GM is you don't have any ego about learning from other people. And it's one, man, this gig will humble you. And if you're really dedicated to it, and believe me, trying to learn how to be like a streaming GM and all that, I've opined on that at length elsewhere, so I won't rehash it. But it has been a humbling experience for me, for sure. So I just really appreciate the resources and the time and the thought that the people who have kind of walked the path ahead of me have put in, and actually you've been one of them. The very first. The very first video of yours I saw was about the perils of increasing the size of Barovia's map.
That's the most popular video to date, which is funny because I didn't expect it to be that popular. And then other videos I've put out where I thought, oh, this will be as popular or more popular. It's just been nowhere near as popular. So that video has really resonated with people.
So I have 3. I don't have 1. I don't have 2. I have 3 favors I want to ask of you, and I think you'll be amenable to all of them, though.
Okay.
The first one is that when this video gets published, if you would just leave a comment with basically, and I can pin it, with basically just all the different ways that people can interact with you. So your Reddit handle and your YouTube channel and your, just all of that, so that I can say hey troopers, or Darkeport people. Sometimes we affectionately call them troopers. So it's because the Troupe, because we talk about the Darkeport Troupe. So, and then I'll just direct people, because I suspect as Darkeport kind of plays through Curse of Strahd, that we'll have, I'm sure some of our faraway friends will be interested in trying, of course, trying it out for themselves, and why not? It's a lot of fun doing it better than me, potentially, I hope. And then the second one is I need to ask Dragon and Carta this too. We've been kind of getting ready to launch our own little Reddit subpage and on Darkeport, and just start talking, because there's a lot of stuff where I think Reddit would be a better repository We have a wiki. We have a pretty lively Discord, but I don't know. I'm feeling like Reddit is just a good place to get like really use it the way that some of the people like yourself and Dragna and etc. have used it, where it's a great like discussion, discussion. So my favor, I guess, would be like come visit us, add your thoughts, add your brilliance over there, kind of spread that around. And then the last thing is that when I finish with Curse of Strahd, I want to talk to you. I want to debrief with you. Are you cool with that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
That's not going to be for a year or more, probably at our filming, at the pace that we're filming, but I want to I'm sure I'll have just all kinds of ridiculous things to tell you then. So like, look, Dad, I did it, kind of thing.
That sounds
awesome.
amazing.
Awesome. And I will say that I can say from personal experience, Steve, that you're quite responsive on your YouTube page, on your YouTube video. So if anybody wants to interact with you there, they can also see your fantastic video editing skills there as well. I'm always particularly tickled by your video on Doru and the Undercroft and all of that. I forget what the title of that one was, but were you doing the pose?
Mistakes DMs make, and I'm doing the pose there.
Mistakes. That was it. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
It's just the Doru video in my head. I can't think of anything else.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, have you had fun?
Yeah, totally.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time and your thought and your also the fact that you were like so delightful to interact with written. Like, the last thing I'll say on that is it is a rare person who can translate their in-person charm to the written word, and vice versa. And you have both, so that's a really good thing. You should. I need to find you on Reddit then and see how that situation is. That'll be fun. Absolutely. All right, faraway friends. Thank you so much, as always, for the gift of your time. And as you go about your journey, stay safe, stay curious, and don't let the mist sweep you up. Vale.
Thank you.